realized that my relationship constellation did not mirror the results that I wanted to see in my life. Let me say that again. I began to have this epiphany, and I began to realize that my relationship constellation did not mirror the results that I wanted to see in my life. And so as I grew, I came to understand that you are always one decision away from a different life. And one of the things that I always tell people is that there are 12 environments that you must cultivate for a life of success and prosperity. And you've heard me talk many times about how for most people, if we would just get the realm of thought right, we could change so much about our lives. But one of the other environments that you must cultivate is the environment of relationship. And so many people, as I look around the world and I talk with so many people from so many different walks of life, relationships are a huge obstacle to success for so many people. And what I know to be true is that if you want better relationships, then you have to become a better you. Let me say that again. If you want better relationships, you have to become a better you. And when I had that discovery and moment of awareness years ago, it set me on this rigorous path of personal growth, or what I call self-empowerment and self-evolution. I really began to do extensive work on myself because I realized that in order to show up in my relationships to the capacity that I wanted to, that I was going to have to develop and become a better person in the process. And so in the quest of becoming a better me, wrong relationships started to be repelled from my life. Let me say that again. In the quest to become a better me, wrong relationships begin to be repelled from my life. A lot of people have asked, and I've even asked myself this question years ago, why does this keep happening in my life? But, you know, the question is not why does this keep happening in my life. The real question is how do I from ever happening again in my life? Oh, that's a different question. That's going to get me a different answer and outcome. And what I discovered is that this keeps happening in my life because there is some form of deficiency and dysfunction in me that is drawing this into my reality. Let me say it again. There is some form of deficiency or dysfunction that is drawing this into my life. Otherwise, it would not be attracted to me. And so what happened is I began to, at the same time, realize that right relationships started to be attracted into my life. I discovered that as I raised my values, I removed the vultures from my life. Write that down. As I raised my value, I began to remove the vultures from my life. There are certain things that were just no longer attracted to or magnetic in my life anymore because I was doing the work. I was understanding my value, my worth as a human being, my authentic identity. I was understanding that there was no need for me to bend in my morals or principles. All I had to do was have the bravery to be who I was born to be. And as I began to embrace that reality, it began to change the prophetic trajectory of my life and the constellation of my relationships. And I also discovered that the quality of my relationships began to change as a result of me understanding this as well. And so what I began to realize and understand is in order to bring your best to your relationship, you must be willing to do the work to become the best version of yourself. Let me say that again. In order to bring the best to your relationships, you must be willing to do the work to become the best version of yourself. And so what I began to do some deep soul work on myself. And I began to ask myself a very important question. And that question for me was, Jamelle, how do you become the best version of yourself? How do you bring your best to the world? How do you bring the best to your relationships? And what I determine is that the quality of my relationships is determined by the quality of me understanding my worth and value as a human being. It's impossible for me to have quality relationships in my life without me understanding my value and my worth as a human being. And let me pause in this moment and recommend to you my book, Significance, Reclaiming Your Personal Power in a World That Discounts Your Difference. It delves into the power of identity and how to be established in your identity. I have come to understand that you cannot attract what you are unwilling to become. You cannot attract what you are unwilling to become. So I listen to people and they say, Jamelle, I want meaningful, I want mutually beneficial, synergistic relationships in my life. And I begin to look at them, but you're none of those things. So how can I attract into my life what I have not been willing to work to become? And so because I made a decision to work to become a person of value, I began to attract valuable people and relationships into my life. And so what I want you to understand is that you cannot draw what you desire into your life without development. Write that down. You cannot draw what you desire into your life without development. And so a lot of people, we want a lot of things. We have very high expectations for our relationships and very low development. And what I've discovered is that when you have a disconnect between expectations and development, what happens is you create more and more broken and dysfunctional relationships in your life, because we cannot attract what we aspire to be. We attract who we are. And most people are drawn to dysfunction and repulsed by wholeness. Write that down. Most people are drawn to dysfunction and repulsed by wholeness. And so you have to become whole. As I began to do the work, I began to realize that there was a lot of people in my life that should not be in my life. They were toxic, they were negative, they were dysfunctional, they did not affirm the greatness and the direction that my life was headed in, and they were just people that I just didn't need around me. And so you have to determine what is it that you are willing to live without? Who can you live without? Who do you need to remove from the inner circle of your life so that you can take your life out of neutral and into overdrive? The broken you is at war with the best you. Write that down. The broken you is at war with the best you. And let me tell you, for a long time, that broken me was winning. And I had to make a decision. What are you doing? You don't like the direction you're going in. The relationships in your life do not support, anchor, or undergird where you're going. So either you're going to make some adjustments or you're going to continue to experience these same cycles in your life. And as I just said, in order to bring your best to your relationships, you have to do the work to become the best version of yourself. I've discovered that artificial connections are formed based on vanity and vices. I wish I could totally unpack that because that's a heavy statement, but artificial connections are formed based on vanity and vices. In other words, there's no substance into those relationships. I've discovered that artificial relationships are founded on dysfunction, deceit, and trauma. Let me say that again. Artificial relationships are founded on dysfunction and trauma. I've also discovered that authentic connections are established on value and vision. And so are the relationships in your life, have they been forged based on dysfunction and trauma, or do you have relationships that are based on value, worth, and vision? Because the difference in these two statements I just made will determine the health and the stability of the relationships in your life. And if we're honest, for most people, we've built our lives around dysfunctional and traumatic relationships, and we have very few relationships in our lives that really understand our value and worth and are vision-oriented. Let me tell you something about me. Anybody that really knows me, anybody that is a part of my closest inner circle will tell you. I don't surround myself with people that do not have a vision for their lives. You heard me say on this podcast for years that the problem of our time is not a drug problem. It is not an alcohol problem. It is not a sex problem. It is not a gang violence problem, prostitution problem, human trafficking problem. The problem that we have in the world is we have a